So, of course, we understand perfectly well that we must provide the security so the business and people can trust and develop without any fear. No doubt that the biggest guarantee can be NATO membership. And Ukraine will definitely become a member. And we must ensure access to larger markets. And without any doubts, access to EU market is the best guarantee for this. And of course, in addition to this, we need to have a comprehensive reform agenda, the result of which will support investors at the very stage, from the idea of investing and setting up a business in Ukraine to its successfully operation in Ukraine. We are in a constant dialogue with investors, and we understand their needs and are already working on them. Investors need smart governance and clear rules of game. As an example, just this year, the government has run a competition and appointed independent supervisory board of big state-owned companies like Naftogaz, Ukrposhta, Chatbank, and others. We need an enhanced business climate. For achieving this aim, we have started a huge deregulation, going through 1,000 different regulations and cancelling hundreds. Business asks for access to capital and clear and competitive fiscal policy. Here we're already working on creation of Ukrainian Development Fund, which is going to provide equity capital to many important investment projects. We also need a modern labor market that will require labor market and access to specialists, and we already start to amend, to work out the amendments to the law, so to provide a comprehensive draft reform. So we are systemically work with the world's best economists on this issue and policies to ensure that all these needs are addressed in the Ukrainian business environment, in law, regulation, and public service. And we are taking the commitments to transform Ukraine into the most convenient and quickest country for doing business. Timothy, I was trying as quick as possible, as usual.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I damaged everything.
So thanks a lot, Yulia. And I didn't announce Rostislav Shurma from a deputy head of the office of the president of Ukraine, because he is so dear to my heart that I always think, he is everywhere. So in that sense, I just kind of assumed that he's announced, but he was not. So my apologies for that. Nonetheless, he's not speaking right now. He will be a little bit later. Foreign Secretary, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This is all about adaptation. This is about flexibility and adaptation. We're demonstrating that today. Look, thank you for coming here. The agenda on this session is a real priority, and it is really good to see that the room is currently over capacity, because I think it shows the real interest that there is. And I'm going to start off by saying that our Ukrainian friends, our Ukrainian colleagues, have made notable progress on reform and transparency, all of which has been done during a period of incredibly disturbing and trying circumstances. We've seen speeches from the Ukrainian leadership in the main plenary session this morning, demonstrating their commitment. We've heard the comments from Minister Svaridenko about Ukraine's economic vision. But we should recognize that reform has many purposes, but all of those purposes serve to improve government standards and government effectiveness. Now, the primary aim of reform in Ukraine, in this instance, is to boost investor confidence and bring in the money that Ukraine needs for its reconstruction. Donors need to see progress with regard to reform and transparency to give the confidence to keep the flow of international investment coming into Ukraine. And of course, that's exactly what Ukraine wants as well. Now, wars can devastate both victors and losers alike, but they can also strengthen and cultivate a country's inherent qualities, achieving hitherto unutilized advantages, realizing untapped potential, and that is exactly what we are seeing with regard to Ukraine. Now, reform is about transparency, it's about accountability, it's about the rule of law, it's about free markets, and of course markets need to be regulated to keep them free from manipulation and allow them to maintain competition. And this is the path that Ukraine has chosen to take. And the UK fully supports Ukraine's decision to do so. And the UK has been a long-standing friend and partner in Ukraine's reform and anti-corruption journey. We've done so for many years. And I'm very glad that through our partnership, but predominantly through Ukraine's own efforts, we are seeing progress. Take Prozoro. It's a procurement system. Along with other allies, we, the UK, helped Ukraine roll this out. And it has generated an incredible saving of $255 million in 2021 alone. Even more importantly than that, it means that essential support, including food, has been delivered to war-torn Ukrainian communities quicker and more effectively. And that $255 million can now be reinvested to where Ukraine needs it most. This is the prize. This is the opportunity. I also want to briefly highlight two projects that we're delivering alongside our American friends in USAID. The flagship TAPAS project is building transparency and accountability into public services in Ukraine. We are putting £12 million into the project. The US has just increased its own contribution by over $10 million. The UK and the US have jointly invested $53 million in Ukraine's digital transformation since 2016. And today, Ukraine has the highest ranking in the EU's latest European Open Data Index, despite being in 17th place just 2 years ago. And we should remind ourselves that transformation has happened whilst this country is fighting to defend itself against Russia's illegal and unprovoked full-scale invasion. That's why we are so proud to continue working alongside our international friends in support of Ukraine. And the US and the UK are working together on state-owned enterprise reform as well. We put £3.5 million into a project that reforms, or perhaps moves for the very first time, state-owned assets into private ownership. Supporting projects like this is why I entered politics. And to see it being delivered in a country defending itself again is quite remarkable. And I'm sure that's part of the motivation which sees the United States adding $20 million to help support Ukraine's public sector in wartime so that they can get the best value for money from every single penny spent by the Ukrainian state. And today, I'm delighted to confirm the UK's support, ongoing support, including £15 million from our Good Governance Fund. And unsurprisingly, this does exactly what it says on the tin. It helps deliver good governance. Now, I could go on all day about how proud I am of Ukraine's reform, not just on the battlefield, but in their institutions. But there is enough conflict in the world, and I do not want to generate any more by overstaying my time at the lectern. But I want to finish by saying this is a conversation that we need to have. It is not always the easiest conversation to have, but I am genuinely grateful that Ukrainians, the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian leadership has embraced our friendship in support in this issue, because this will underpin their recovery in the future. Slava Ukraini.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. So before going to the specific changes and the reforms that we plan to do, maybe I would like to quickly remind about why we are planning to do that. I don't see, is it working? Yeah. So not everybody was at the sessions before, so we have very clear vision what we want to build in Ukraine in the economy. We want to build these segments where we have really strong competitive advantages and where we have the strong fundamentals behind. We obviously see that this is the energy, with the investment tickets about perhaps 400 billion. I will not stop on that, but on the next session we will deeply elaborate on this, revealing all the fundamentals, all the segments, all the calculations, how we arrived to these numbers. The second one is about the green industries, specifically green steel, and as well in tomorrow's sessions we'll have a deep dive in the green steel industry and deep analysis and competitive advantages. The other absolutely clear story is about the agri. Everybody knows agri sector of Ukraine, and we see the huge potential again of the dozens of billions of investments as well will be covered tomorrow. And the same is about the critical minerals such as lithium, uranium, graphite, titanium, iron and others. And obviously as a result of that we expect that Ukraine will become a construction boom country for a decade. And in total this is all about the investment ticket for hundreds of billions. But now, what we need to do and change for this to happen? There are two things before we speak about the reforms that perhaps are much bigger than all the reforms together. The first one is NATO and the other one is EU. Why NATO? Let's put ourselves at the place of business. Would you invest billions now while you are at the risk of being your asset fully destroyed? Obviously, we do implement the war risk insurance, and we do believe that it will cover the first projects, maybe the first dozen of projects, maybe for hundreds of millions, for billions. But we will not be able to implement such a big program with war risk insurance. The only and the best war risk insurance is NATO. The second one is European Union. And first of all, about the market of European Union. Obviously, the Ukrainian recovery will be a good market, specifically for the construction, for the infrastructure companies. But the main value of all these segments, of all these ideas, is about the access with the competitive products to the European market. Now, what homework should we do in Ukraine to make ourselves competitive? The first one, perhaps, will be about the law enforcement agencies and judicial reforms. I think this is perhaps the most complicated topic because I think nobody has a clear answer to it. Let's be frank. There are many roadmaps, many action plans. Some of them are being already fulfilled for 2-3 years, but still we are not yet there. But what are the good signs? The good signs, I think that the results, for example, for the NABU, the recent case for taking the head of the Supreme Court of Ukraine at the bribe, I think this is the very vivid evidence that the anti-corruption infrastructure works in Ukraine. Because I can hardly imagine any other country in the world where as well corruption exists in the courts, where this type of operation would happen. What we plan to do in the courts fundamentally? We plan to segment it into two big categories. Everything which is immaterial, we want to convert to digital courts, because we have a good track record with our digital public services, and the courts will be one of them as the next. Everything which is about material, commercial, and administrative courts will be under very tough supervision and analysis of the fair practices there in the courts. As for the law enforcement agencies, I think quite quickly, just after this conference, you will see the next steps that we will take. I think it's about the weeks. But finally, what we want to implement, that there is only one window of communication for the business. There are no 4, 5, 7 agencies that are visiting the business on the different matters and the bribes as a result of this contact. There will be only one with the opportunity to communicate on all the matters. Number 2 block is about the digitalization. So everybody knows about the progress that we have done with the DIA and with the digitization of public services. We plan only to enhance the speed of the public services that we will provide, because the logic is very simple. If there is no physical contact with the bureaucrat, there is no risk of corruption. And there is one more important step that I believe that we will take. I cannot tell you definitely that we will do, because it is still under discussion, but under the very deep and serious discussion with the whole team, with the president, with the prime minister, we want to be the first fully cashless economy. We know that there is a lot of debates about this from the different stakeholders, that we are eliminating the rights of the people with no cash, but we believe this will be the very effective tool to eliminate, I think, 95 to 99% of all the corruption cases in the country, if there is no cash at all. And I think we come in the nearest months with the roadmap and with the final decision whether we do it or not. But I believe the decision will be yes. Next item. What is important else for the business? The competitive tax system. Because I see the representatives of many multinationals in this room, and when you plan where to put up your next facility, your next headquarters, you check on the multiple criteria, and the tax rates is one of them. So if you want to compete with our neighboring countries, we need to offer the rates which are in fact not worse than they offer, because they have many other advantages. This is number 1, and number 2 is the system of communication and administering. And here we'll go back to the full digitization of the process. The next block, which is really important, is about access to finance. You could hardly find a project in any industry, in any company, which is funded fully from the equity of the owners. It's always about the blend of equity and the blend of loans, about different types of loan products. That's why we will increase our work with trying to access to the export credit agencies, setting up the Ukrainian Development Fund, which will be running very intensively together with BlackRock, with JP Morgan, with McKinsey, who are now consulting us on setting it up, and on the accession, obviously, to the European Union funds, structural funds, to build up different industries. Next one, labor market. Unfortunately, Ukraine has inherited quite post-Soviet regulation for the labor market. We plan to change it quite fundamentally in the nearest half a year, I think. What do we mean? First of all, this is the easiness of hiring and firing people. This is about the model of paying the salaries, moving to the hourly wages from the monthly salaries, removing the limits for the working weeks, working months, because we need to rebuild the country and we need to provide the right and freedom for every person. If the person wants to work 60 hours per week to rebuild the country, let him or her work. We should not limit that. Next block, about as you see, we are speaking about liberalizing and about the free economy. But for the free economy, we need to have the strong regulators. And here we have 3 very important items. Item number 1 is the antitrust. Unfortunately, at the moment, the antitrust agency is not operating full scale in Ukraine, and we plan to adopt the new law in the nearest weeks, believe next session or the one after the next, which was developed together with international partners, which will provide the true capacity to our antitrust agency. Number 2 is the financial market regulator. The law is developed, it's being approved in the committees. I think there are final 5 to 7 points that we are still discussing. Again, it was developed together with the international partners, and I believe a month or 2, it will be fully adopted and implemented in Ukraine. And the energy sector, here we have finished, because the law has been adopted 2 weeks ago. The new regulator, which was fully agreed in terms of the authority with the European Commission and European Energy Council, is now in place, and physically we'll build up this capacity, I think, within the next months for the energy regulator. What is really as well important to boost the business activities, to eliminate the business and market distortions. As well, we've done the very bold step on the energy rates just a couple of weeks ago. As you might know, we have increased the rates for the electricity for the citizens, for the population 2 times. You can hardly find any country which has done this during the war, because we have analyzed multiple cases, and I must say in the 99%, the governments have been very populistic in keeping the rates at the flat level and not touching them before the end of the war. And we did it. The same we have to do for many other products, and we are intended to change it. As well, we plan to enhance the access of the private capital to the sectors which have been traditionally led and owned only by the government. The sectors like the education, like the healthcare, like the infrastructure, and others. Next item, privatization. We definitely will go with the massive and scalable privatization. Just to confirm that, we have recently, just 6 months ago, started really big privatization for the small and medium enterprises in absolutely digital model through the Prozoro system. And the results have been impressive. The price and the tickets for the same enterprises that have been sold before the war, during the war have increased 2 to 3 times. And already we have got, since the half a year during the war, more than 5 billion in receipts from the privatization. And we expect that this number will grow exponentially further. And for those companies that will stay or government-owned or partially government-owned, they will all be corporatized and will be structured under single sovereign wealth fund and properly managed as the holding company. Capital amnesty. We've done an unsuccessful effort to do the amnesty of capital in Ukraine just half a year before the war. No result. So we think that we will suggest a very bold approach of implementing full amnesty of capital with no implementation, with no exclusions, because we need to mobilize all the capital that is in the country to transform and rebuild our country. And perhaps the final page, where we want to win in the competition. Every company which considers where to put the facility, again, checks where to do and where to build. And unfortunately, we have very few competitive advantages to our neighbors. And one of them, we will believe, is the easiness to build the facility. Today, I think Ukraine is perhaps the most simple, the easiest country in the world to set up legal entity. You can do it online within a couple of hours. And we want to repeat the story for the physical facility. And here we break down the task to 4 main items. The first one is about land allocation and functional use of land. The draft of the law is ready and will be submitted to the parliament in the next weeks. The second one is about the connecting to the utilities. Any facility needs electricity, gas, water, and others. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, I think this is the very weak place because it's very bureaucratized and very complicated. It will change fundamentally in 3 to 4 months. Architecture and municipality approvals. My colleague Alexander Kubrakov has already spoken on that, and the law is already voted, which fixes 70 to 80% of these issues. And I think it will be soon approved finally. And the residual part will be again fixed within half a year. And the final one is about the environmental approvals. Unfortunately, they are often overcomplicate the process for 3, 4, 6 months. As well, we plan to liberalize this substantially. And just to summarize, we are intent to fully comply with the European standards and European rules. But we think that for the transitory period, for the intensive recovery, it may be 3, 5, 7 years, I think we should have a special regime. Special regime for the taxes to become really competitive. Special regime for some of the approval procedures to become much more liberal than the typical European standards. Because we need to build, build, and build. And the only bottleneck for these projects should be the resources and the capacity of the investor and the engineering process, but not the bureaucratic approvals. This is the way that we start now, and we'll reach our final target. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rostislav. And I would like to invite to speak Gerrit-Jan Koopman, Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations, European Commission.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me pick up where Rostislav left. He set out, I think, a compelling vision for an economic growth model anchored on two principles, as you said it, NATO membership and EU membership. And maybe I can talk a little bit about what EU membership, or rather working with the EU, eventually becoming a member, offers this compelling vision. I think there are essentially three pillars that are relevant in this context. First, there is a big market. It's the world's biggest free market. And in fact, we have already today integrated Ukraine to a very large extent through an unprecedented free trade agreement that actually no third country has. So Ukraine benefits from an exceptional series of autonomous measures giving access to large parts of the internal market today already. So this is not something that eventually becomes available when union membership materializes. This is something that is there today. Secondly, the process of accession itself, I think, can best be understood as rewriting the software of a country. It's really about modernizing vital processes, essentially aiming at modernizing the fundamentals of democracy, putting in place good governance, the rule of law, strong anti-corruption practices, respect of fundamental rights, and also an economic reform agenda that makes you fit for an internal market where free competition and fair competition reigns supreme. So simply by going through a process that maybe at first sight looks bureaucratic, in fact you modernize your economy. And what you've been talking about in many instances in terms of the reforms you're undertaking are in fact reforms that you need to do anyway to become a member state. So membership is like an economic North Star for the country. And we know that our Ukrainian friends see it this way, but we in the Commission also see it this way. And as you heard our President say this morning, we will work tirelessly with our Ukrainian partners to help them to become a member by introducing the necessary reforms. We know it is a lot of work and there are no shortcuts. You cannot cut corners. You actually need to do all the hard work. But what we see, and that was the message Mrs. von der Leyen gave this morning, is that you are embracing this very energetically. I cannot at this juncture say very much about where the Commission will come out in October, but what I can say today is that there is an enormously strong reform drive across a wide range of important chapters. So the modernization is starting already today and is making good progress. The third element is financial support. The Union, the EU and its member states have supported Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees, of which there are about 10 million in the EU, to the tune of 70 billion euros since the start of the war. That, I think, is the largest support we've ever offered a third country, but it is totally and utterly justified given the horrendous situation the country faces and the fact that it is fighting for our European values. Now, going forward, we all know that rebuilding the country will be costly and will require sustained reform going forward. And that is why yesterday the Commission proposed a very significant multi-annual 4-year financial package of 50 billion euros that not only would contribute significantly to funding the state as it reestablishes sound public finances, but also, and that's the crucial message for the private sector here in the room, would create a Ukrainian investment facility that would cover, through guarantees, many of the risks that investors would take as they invest in Ukraine. That plan will have to be specified in terms of its investments and in terms of its reforms, which obviously will have to be articulated with its European path. And payments under the plan will be conditional on progress on these reforms. The reason that I'm elaborating it is that we've just seen the presentation of a plan, and obviously Ukraine can only have one economic reform plan. So we will be working hopefully with our Ukrainian partners in the coming weeks and months to ensure that the Ukrainian reform plan, the economic plan, is also the foundation for this new instrument, and we hope that the international community can come on board and contribute equally to this plan. Now, I'm a very optimistic person because I know that enlargement and integration in the EU's internal market has lifted the generation of countries that joined in the 2000s to levels of economic prosperity that, frankly speaking, no one could have expected at the time. All these countries were growing 6 to 7%, not for a few years, but for 2 decades. And some of them now, I'm thinking of some of the Baltic states, the Czech Republic, are actually reaching levels of prosperity that soon will be above the average in the EU. So that is a message of hope. If the accession process and the reforms are well managed, the prospects for the country can be incredibly positive. And I think that's a message investors in the room should take home and reflect on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. I see that Rostislav Shurma is disappearing again, this time from the slides behind us. You're not there again. Well, it wasn't my doing, but we'll try to get him back on, okay?
We haven't forgotten.
We are short on time, so we have 17 minutes until the hard stop of the panel. And I was supposed to ask 3 questions to each panelist. I just don't have enough time to even ask these questions. And 3 people have not spoken a word yet. So I'm going to pose an open-ended question, but specific enough that you guys all can come in. And the question is, we have just outlined priorities for reforms in Ukraine, for structural and immediate, and also raised certain critical issues, notwithstanding the situation in which Ukraine is. What is missing, or what would you add, or do you believe these priorities? What's your take? What would you add to this? So that would be my general question to all panelists, and you just, volunteer. Maybe Stephanie, we'll start with you.
So first, thank you for the opportunity. This is indeed a very important subject matter. And I think as an investor on the panel, I need to speak for the investors. And let me start by saying, and everyone has said this, but we're looking for a consistent, transparent environment to invest for the long term. And governance and rule of law really are the critical pieces to that. And as horrible and horrific as the war is, if there is a silver lining for Ukraine, it's that we now have an opportunity to help Ukraine get this right. So what does that mean? I think very near term, if I were to pick 2 things that I think are fundamentally critical to enticing investment, the first would be recognition of international arbitration and rules against international arbitration as they come back into the country. This will give investors a sense of security that they don't have today working within the Ukrainian system. And the second, and I think it comes back to what we were talking about EU accession and NATO accession, we need to make sure that every single concessional dollar is tied to what President van der Leyen called today the coordinated community. So everything it's going to take to join the EU needs to be tied to that concessional money, and it shouldn't come without that. Then when I look a little bit longer into the medium term, we've talked a lot today about digitization. We heard the Secretary of State Blinken, Mr. Shermer recommended. Many people have been talking about the great work that the Ukrainians have already done. The one thing they haven't said about digitalization is that it actually levels the playing field for the small SMEs and the large companies at the same time. So the more that we can do to expand that digitization to allow all companies to compete equally in the current environment in Ukraine, especially since a great amount of the early economic growth is going to come from the SMEs, that will be critical. Then I also think that in the medium term, and I think you referenced this, Sharma, but one of the things that we really need to consider is a separate commercial court, and with that separate commercial court, one appellate court. And if we can consolidate all of that knowledge one place, it will be faster and quicker to resolve conflicts and to move companies into bankruptcy. And if we can do that now, I think you will really, again, be signaling to the International Investment Committee that you're really serious about reforms. And then I think the last thing, and it's been touched on today, but maybe not quite as much as I would have liked to see it, is really the role of civil society and the private sector together. So I look back at Afghanistan and I say to myself, why did 2.4 of the $7.8 billion that was given to Afghanistan disappear? Was because there was no civil society watching over the disbursement of that money. Ukraine has a very deep, very rich civil society that we all need to continue to support. And then tied together with that is the private sector, which is exactly what we've been talking about. What is the short-term plan and what is the long-term plan for the implementation of the reform process? Again, if you go back to Bosnia-Herzegovina and you ask yourself, why did it fail? It failed because the business sector couldn't see the short and long-term plan, and civil society couldn't track and trace that long-term plan. And I actually think that the Ukrainians have the opportunity to get both of those things right as they move forward. And finally, I would be remiss to say that this is not all the responsibility of the government. It also matters who you do business with. I spent 30 years in the IFC before I joined Citibank. And if I walked away knowing one thing, it's who you do business with. So we must make sure that we hold all the partners who are going to be investing in Ukraine accountable for following best practice.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to, this threat, I guess, of all corrupt officials in Ukraine, the director of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. What's your take? Are you going to build the anti-corruption culture for good in Ukraine, or is it just still work in progress?
In progress, actually. But we can keep going. Я відповідатиму українською, з вашого дозволу.
I'm going to speak Ukrainian, so please use the microphones, not microphones, sorry, your headsets. We talk a lot today about the openness, transparency, and the recovery process. The leaders of different countries talked about during the opening of plenary session. And on one side, it goes here about the deep systemic reforms.
З іншого боку, це про сильні антикорупційні органи, про сильну антикорупційну інфраструктуру. Національне антикорупційне бюро України і спеціалізована антикорупційна прокуратура, створені з 2015 року, вже досягли значних результатів у своїй діяльності. І мені дуже приємно чути, що дуже багато присутніх на конференції знають про одне з наших найгучніших затримань. Це затримання керівника колишнього голови Верховного суду України. Про що цей кейс? Він не просто про затримання, про викриття корупційного кейсу. Він про те, що антикорупційна інфраструктура, збудована за допомогою міжнародних партнерів, працює ефективно, здатна досягати результатів, працює на результат і концентрується на виявленні корупційних схем, що тривають. Корупційних схем, що вчиняються прямо зараз, вчиняються найвищими посадовими особами. Вона про те, що немає недоторканих осіб, вона про те, що створюється завдяки такій діяльності передумови для того, щоб в Україну приходили інвестиції. Що інвестиції ці захищені, що система, антикорупційна система здатна захистити інвестора, здатна забезпечити прозорість розподілу коштів тих значних фінансів, які будуть надходити в Україну в результаті на відбудови. Але потрібно говорити про те, що потрібно посилювати антикорупційну інфраструктуру і суттєвою частиною, важливим документом, який схвалив уряд, є державна антикорупційна програма, де значна частина стосується саме посилення антикорупційних органів. Це НАБУ, САП, ВАКС, посилення їхньої інституційної спроможності, збільшення їх штатної чисельності, створення експертної установи, відновлення електронного декларування і багато різних важливих аспектів, які дозволять антикорупційним органам працювати ще більш ефективно. І про що взагалі затримання тих чи інших топ-посадовців? Це не просто про затримання, це про попередження корупційних злочинів, це про зачищення від корупції цілих сфер суспільного життя. І чим сильніше буде антикорупційна інфраструктура, чим сильніше будуть антикорупційні органи, тим кращим буде інвестиційний бізнес-клімат. І найголовніше, що боротьба з корупцією – це найбільший запит на сьогоднішній день українського суспільства. Найбільший запит українського суспільства, який суттєво зріс після повномасштабного вторгнення Російської Федерації. Тому ефективна боротьба з корупцією, забезпечення прозорості – це в першу чергу забезпечення запиту українського народу на справедливість. Дякую.
Thank you very much. So now, Victor Nistula, you're the chair of the RISE Coalition of Ukrainian civil society organizations. How do you see the role of the civil society in helping Ukraine become prosperous and fully democratic during and post-war?
Yes, thanks. Last but not least, civil society. Thanks for inviting us and giving the space. So Russia tried to destroy Ukrainian critical infrastructure and was somehow successful. But there is one component of Ukrainian critical infrastructure that Russia will never be able to destroy because it doesn't understand it. It's not existing in Russia. It's civil society. Civil society was always a foundation of Ukrainian development and in many cases was a great partner of Ukrainian government. I'm glad that Mr. Cleverly mentioned Prozoro. Prozoro is an exceptional example of how cooperation between civil society, government, business and international partners brings results. So it's a world-class procurement system that also inspired UK. And I'm happy that UK, during the development of its own procurement bill, referred to Prozoro multiple times, and it was mentioned in parliamentarian hearings here as well.
Yeah, that's
so going forward, we, Ukrainian civil society organizations, after the war began, we decided to unite to support the government of Ukraine with the future reconstruction efforts. And for us, RISE is not just a rise of Ukraine. It's foundation, reconstruction integrity, sustainability, and efficiency. Integrity is not possible without transparency and accountability. And Ukraine, before the war, was the most transparent government in the world, official rating. Obviously, war has its own impact. And right now, we do have some limited access to information and open data. And to introduce transparency back, we just have to do whatever we did before the war began. Moreover, we are now working with DREAM, Digital Registration Ecosystem for Accountable Management, and once again, thanks UK for your generous support to make DREAM come true. So DREAM will not only introduce maximum level of transparency for the reconstruction, but also will make reconstruction of Ukraine accountable to the whole world. So every taxpayer who contributes to Ukrainian reconstruction will be able to track how every dollar, pound, hryvnia, euro is spent for rebuilding Ukraine. Then, integrity. Integrity, we do have a great infrastructure for integrity. National Agency for Corruption Prevention, Anti-Corruption Bureau, Prosecutor's Office, Specialized Anti-Corruption Court. Again, we just have to continue doing what we've been doing. We have to strengthen these institutions, we have to protect these institutions, and we have to give you, do the job, using all the transparency and other tools that Ukraine is proud to have. Sustainability. Sustainability is about building back better. And it's pretty complicated, to build back better. What is EU Green Deal and how to implement it? Does anyone know? I'm sure not. It's too complicated. To build back better, we need knowledge, we need technology, and we need your support to understand how to implement it in practice. So please help us with these reforms, and business, please bring your technology to Ukraine, not just use Ukraine to rebuild. And lastly, efficiency. Efficiency is about capability and capacity. We do have some challenges with Ukraine civil service reform. That's something that we have to protect, that's something that we have to strengthen, and it's all about Ukrainians who will build Ukraine. So we have to have strong bureaucracy with professionals in Ukrainian government. But not only in the central government. Decentralization is core. We have to ensure that communities are capable and have all the capacity and support. So RISE, transparency, accountability, integrity, sustainability, and efficiency, these are foundations for successful economic development. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So our job today is impossible because we have to fit concluding remarks and two or three floor interventions in the next 2 minutes. Do we have energy for the floor intervention? Okay. Okay, good. So that gives us 2 minutes for the concluding remarks. We'll start with Deputy Prime Minister. That's what it says. I have to go with you first.
Okay. I'm not sure that it works.
You have a mic here.
Yes, I think I have
yeah, that's the mic. That's okay. That's the mic. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So actually, first of all, I would like to say thank you to all participants of this panel, because I think it's one of the core panel during this discussion, because we can build up our vision of what we would like to reach, but in case if we won't be able to provide these structural reforms, even during the wartime, we won't be able to reach it. So that's why I think that this discussion was rather interesting for the audience as well. And I think that's something that Restislav Sharma was emphasizing. It's extremely important. And I hope that we would have the further discussion. So that's why I think that we would still keep working on all the structural reforms that we committed previously, and it's not because we have these commitments, because it's important for us to provide them, as it would make us stronger. And as you know, we are fighting, we always emphasize, we are fighting not on the front line, we are fighting on the economic front as well. So that's why it's extremely important for economy to keep running, to provide all these reforms. So that's why I would just to say my best wishes to all the participants, and I hope that this conference would be different from all conference on recovery, as we might see the implementation of these things that we are talking about. I think it's something important we should be focused on. And during the next conference, we would see, is there any progress on something that we are discussing here? Okay, Timothy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Foreign Secretary, please.
Thank you. I don't know if my Thai microphone is working. Yes, good. Well, look, I would, as one of the co-hosts with our good Ukrainian friends, as one of the co-hosts, I'm incredibly proud that we have this session on the agenda, that it's so well attended, and also the engagement from every element of Ukrainian society is represented here on the panel. And one of the things that I think was particularly notable, one of the things that I found very reassuring, was the Ukrainian government plan for reform. And one of the things that has struck me, and I've said this publicly a number of times, over the last 15, 16 months, we've seen the Ukrainian armed forces evolve and improve and modernize and reform in the midst of an intense conflict of self-defense. And for me, that's a proof point that when the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian leadership, set their mind to a challenge, their ability to deliver against that is incredibly impressive. And we have now seen a very well thought through plan of reform. And I think that gives and should give the confidence for investors that Ukraine has a plan, not just to win the war, but to win the peace. And I think we all have a duty and an interest in ensuring they're successful in both. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. With this, let's win the war and win the peace together. Thank you very much, and we conclude this fantastic session.
Right, thank you, mate. Right.
So, thank you very much. With this, let's win the war and win the peace together. Thank you very much, and we conclude this fantastic session.
Right, thank you, mate. Right.
So, thank you very much. With this, let's win the war and win the peace together. Thank you very much, and we conclude this fantastic session.